If you like these videos, please check out my full course at www.lsat.totaltestprep.net with tons of clearly explained actual LSAT questions written by someone who's mastered test and helped others master it, and an evaluation period where you only pay if you want to continue. Okay, so let's take a look at the consequence relationship. So, what is the consequence argument type? Okay, so looking at it, the consequence type starts with a causal relationship and then uses that to conclude something else. Essentially, the argument generally establishes that something will be or is the case on the basis of a causal process or a causal factor. So, common variations are the premises generally introduce a causal process or a causal factor, and the conclusion is an effect or an additional effect to the process. So, for example, we see here it says Tito studied really hard and mastered the concepts for the test. Therefore, Tito got into a top school. So you can see here the premise is that Tito studied really hard and mastered the concepts, and that's we can think of that as a causal factor in that it's a factor which produces an effect. So if you study very hard, you're going to get a very good score, for example. So if you study really hard and master the concepts, a conclusion could have been Tito got a good score, or this is an example of an additional effect. If you get a good score, then that's an effect from studying. That is what is caused by studying. But that in turn can also cause you to get into good school. If you get a good score, that causes you getting into a good school. So this is an example of a situation where you're given, in this case, we're given a causal factor. We're not given the whole process where it says Tito studied really hard and studying gets you a good grade, although they could have said that as well, so you could have both cause and effect. Here we were just given just the causal factor, and the conclusion was a consequence, an effect of that, or in fact, actually an effect of a more immediate effect, which would have been getting a good score. So this is what's going on, in the sense that you're given a factor or a process, causal factor or process, and then the consequence to that, which is the effect to that, or maybe a second order or more long range effect, long term effect. Also, you could have a situation where the premises introduce a causal process in general, and then they'll conclude that if that causal factor is activated in a specific case, then the effect will take place. So, for example, we have here a situation where doing something fun helps take a person's mind off of their trouble. So, this is the causal process. The fun causes you to feel better. And the conclusion, so if Joe goes to the movies, he'll forget about the fight he had with his friend. So here the conclusion says, well, okay, if we activate that process, if we say that the causal factor is true for this person, then they're going to have that consequence. The point is that in this particular variation, you're going to have a conclusion that's a conditional that says, look, if you activate the causal process, then you're going to have the effect, the 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 required effect, or rather the consequence, the effect to that. So an additional thing also actually to keep in mind is that the conclusion can have a degree of likelihood, and the language that's used may phrase it as a prediction. So you want to be on the lookout for that as well, where instead of it simply saying, if this happens, then if he goes to the movies, he'll forget about the fight. It might say something like, so we'll predict that he'll likely forget about his fight if he goes to the movies, or something along those lines. So you want to look for that language as well. Okay, so essentially, these arguments generally state that some sort of transformation will occur, or will conclude that a transformation has occurred or is occurring on the basis of a causal process, or just a causal factor that's known and that is presented in the premises. So you want to be on the lookout for actions, behavior, occurrences, and then their explanations or their effects. That's how a causal process is presented. And also you want to look for the future tense. A lot of times you will have the future tense in the actual uh, the actual conclusion. Um, in addition to that, you can actually think of it as another way of thinking about it is, or something to be on the lookout for is, it's kind of the reverse of the explanation. The explanation says, hey, this is what happened, here's why it happened. These consequence types arguments are going to say, hey, this is what's going to cause something, and this is, and here's what actually happened. Okay. So, and obviously this question type involves causal reasoning, because it's a question of, what causes what is the factor, what is the causal factor, what is the effect. So to quickly summarize, arguments with a consequence or prediction are based on causal reasoning and deal with a causal consequence to a situation that's presented in the premises.